It's a pleasure to welcome everybody here to our first ever Trust in Government Summit. We have a great program prepared for you for today. Soon you'll hear from the IRS Commissioner Danny Werfel being interviewed by Neil Irwin, which we're very excited as a kickoff for this effort. This is obviously a moment, unfortunately, in some ways that is perfect and ripe for this conversation, with the conversation about the government shutdown being on everyone's lips as it should be. Our government today is facing many, many challenges, and this is one that is self-inflicted both to our government's capability to get its work done, but also to the topic of the day, which is trust in government. This is a topic that requires, we believe, everyone to be engaged and involved, and we're excited to have representatives of all the various stakeholders of our society here, from entertainment to media to business and obviously to government leaders themselves. We're particularly excited to be doing this in partnership with Axios. They've been a wonderful partner in so many different ways. We are also grateful in particular to one of our board members, who is actually Jim Vandehei, who helped found Axios, and believe that they have a really important mechanism for communication. Their smart brevity is, we think, in a very effective way to engage with people, including the broader public, about government. I am the president and CEO of the Partnership for Public Service. For those who are not familiar with the partnership, we are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that is focused on trying to make for a better government and a stronger democracy. And we believe that connection is really fundamental. We live in a society in which we cannot take for granted a vibrant, effective government or a vibrant, effective democracy. Usually people focus on electoral politics when they think about democracy. We believe that healthy public institutions are also fundamental to a healthy and effective democracy. And that is part and parcel of what we want to talk about here today. The issue of trust in government is one that we've come to relatively recently. Our focus as an organization has been really primarily looking at how do we get a new generation into government and public service. All of you hopefully know that that's a big problem for us right now. Only 7% of the workforce is under the age of 30. This issue of trust is obviously connected to this question of exciting new people to want to come into government. This is not only an issue of exciting people, it's also a critical issue for how government is actually expecting and demanding new talent and creating a process that is both attractive in getting the new talent to come in, but also in retaining it. We are also very focused on leadership. We see leadership as really the most important ingredient for any organizational success. We have our Public Service Leadership Institute that has a leadership model that outlines what we believe is the core capability that public sector leaders need in order to be successful and effective for the American public, beginning with a commitment to the public good and being their stewardship of public resources. More information on the partnership is available on our website, and obviously with anybody here at the partnership, please just talk to us. We'd love to share what we do with you. As I mentioned, more recently, we've been focusing on the question of the relationship of our society, broadly speaking, to our federal government, because we believe that that relationship is, again, fundamental to the health of government ultimately, and also to our democracy. In particular, we think we need a government that is both trustworthy and trusted, that latter part being the subject of this conversation. The data is not good. When we been doing some polling and looking at what the public thinks about the government, and in particular, trust in the institution of our government, we've been hearing this for many, many years. The numbers are going down. We're trying to understand why and what we can do about it. We're focused really on three different things in terms of how you can actually impact that relationship between our public and our government and rebuilding trust. And the first that we've discovered is that we very much need to improve the narrative around government. Our research shows that when you say the federal government, most Americans, and this will come probably, especially right now, is no surprise, think about bickering politicians in Washington. And they don't think about the career civil servants who are 80% obviously outside the DC metro area, who are serving the American public in all kinds of ways. So part of what we're trying to do is make sure we do a better job of sharing those stories. Hopefully all of you are familiar with our Service to America medals, which is sort of our flagship effort to get those stories out. We have an incredible set of honorees this year. Please look at those stories, share those stories, and then help us find a new set of federal employees to recognize for next year. But we will be honoring at a gala all the winners of the Sammys on October 17th this year. We are also, in addition to that, working very hard to figure out how to engage other critical stakeholders. I mentioned earlier the entertainment industry, clearly media, and you'll hear from representatives from media later on today, and the business community are three critical stakeholders that we believe have a very important role to play here. In addition to that, we think that government itself can do a better job of sharing its story. We are in a moment of particular possibility with respect to government with some of the commitments that have been made either around the bipartisan infrastructure law or the Inflation Reduction Act or the CHIPS Act. These are very, very big commitments that have been made on behalf of the American people. And it's an opportunity, I think, for our government to shine and demonstrate that it is listening to the voices of Americans about the kind of help that they need and ensuring that that the government is delivering meaningful support in all kinds of different ways. As an organization, we are very much also focused on connectivity. So one of the things we've done with respect to trying to help government share its stories better is to organize the public affairs officers who obviously are the tip of the spear in terms of sharing stories about what agencies do. We bring them together on a monthly basis to help learn from each other and learn from external resources. Part of what we see, honestly, is that pretty much everything that should be happening in government is happening someplace, oftentimes not observed and certainly not shared. And so what we believe is we need to bring those things up. We need really an effort to do more in the way of bright spot analysis and sharing and learning. And we believe then a lot of great value can be created. And third, we're also looking at trying to improve transparency in government. So you might look as a resource, for example, at our appointee tracker that we do with the Washington Post. It's drawn a lot of attention to the question about the Senate confirmation process and how long it takes to get folks in. We're very focused on customer experience as a focus point for government services and how we can create better engagement with the public. And I'm looking at Mark Lerner over here, who is very much engaged in our effort around modern government, how we make sure that our government is utilizing the best processes to deliver services effectively. So that's a quick range of different things that we do. We also have a trust in government dashboard that we hope you all take a look at, and you can have get access to that from our website. And I have now filibustered long enough because I've seen our primary guest arrive here. I will say, the proverbial needs no introduction, but I'm going to give you one anyway, a personal one. I really believe that the work that Danny Werfel is doing right now at IRS is the most important transformation that I've seen in pretty much 3 decades around our government. The IRS performs really a fundamental function for our government. It's 96% of our revenue, and Danny will correct me, I may have undersold. It's okay. So and so much more, and I really believe that leadership, as I mentioned earlier, is the fundamental ingredient for effective transformation in our government. We've got a great leader in Danny, and we also have a commitment of resources over many years. Again, part of the challenge of work in our government is the lack of continuity. To have a 10-year runway, is really important in terms of the kind of work that he needs to do. So I'm also excited, in addition to Danny, to have one of my media heroes, Neil Irwin, actually conduct the conversation with him. I whenever see his byline anywhere, I read it because I always learn something. So with that, welcome to this first ever session. Enjoy the conversation. Please give us feedback in terms of what you liked and what we can do better next time. And we look forward to working with you, not just here today, but going forward on this really important issue. So with that, Danny and Neil.
Place for you to drink, right? Good morning, everyone. So good to be here. We'll dive right into it. That was a great introduction, Danny. So, the IRS is this unique agency that has interactions with almost every adult. Frequently, those interactions are antagonistic. Frequently, it is for the purpose of doing something nobody likes to do, which is pay their taxes. I guess as a level setting, can you walk us through what you've been up to since IRA passed and how it connects to this mission of trust that we're here to talk about?
Yeah, I think it's, I think a lot of leaders come in to an organization and they announce, we are at a historic moment. We are at an inflection point. And I have the luxury of it actually being very, very true. We had, prior to the Inflation Reduction Act from 2010 to 2022, year after year budget cuts to the IRS. And during that period of time, during those 12 years, the world changed dramatically in terms of tax administration for a million different reasons. One, way more filers because the population grew. Two, new programs and requirements like the Affordable Care Act was enacted during this period, the laws related to pandemic and new tax credits, so new requirements. And then the economy changed. The gig economy emerged. We went from a world in which nobody heard of PayPal or Venmo, and now those are realities. So over these 12 years, the world changed and the IRS was not investing to keep pace. And so enter the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022, which provides tens of billions of dollars to essentially catch up to what was lost in the previous 12 years. And across every dimension of the IRS, things were breaking at the seams in 2022. We had record low levels of service in our call center, the most anemic low audit rates in our history, and our technology getting older and older at a time where it was losing pace with what we needed to do. So what we have before us right now is both a challenge and an opportunity to rapidly rebuild what was lost during those 12 years and catch up. And so what my message is, and what and a critical point to the trust discussion is, because you said it, we touch every household. So every time that there is a national debate about the role of government, and that debate becomes front and center. Government is too big, government is too small, government is weaponized, government is overreaching, government isn't doing enough, all of that. The IRS gets pulled in to that debate because of the unique role we play in touching every household. Now, what happens when we get pulled in is it gets very politicized, and there starts to skew a bit in terms of what the IRS is really trying to achieve versus what we are actually trying to achieve. So what we're actually trying to achieve, I think, should be thought of as basic common sense, good things for all Americans. And it's really three things that I want to get done with Inflation Reduction Act money to serve America. One, if you need to reach the IRS, you should be able to reach the IRS. If we're not funded, it's harder for us to be accessible. Two, we need to be able to hold wealthy, large filers, complex filers, just as accountable for paying their taxes as middle and low income. And if we're not investing, if we're underfunded, then people of means can do a much more effective job of shielding their income than middle and low income. So we keep pace with middle and low income. We can't assess the wealthy. That's inequitable tax enforcement. A well-funded IRS keeps that equity going. And third is tax scams. There are victims out there that if the IRS is not funded, we can't step in and help you disrupt those scams, help you once you've been victimized, and then hold the perpetrators accountable. An IRS that's not funded is on its heels. An IRS that's well-funded is leaning in. So I hope to build trust by giving this kind of unimpeachable set of objectives. You should be able to reach us, whether through our walk-in centers or call center or web. We should be able to hold each taxpayer equally accountable for what they owe. The fact that you have means should not mean that you're less accountable for someone who doesn't have means. And unfortunately, we have bad actors out there that are exploiting the tax system and victimizing honest people, in particularly vulnerable populations like the elderly. And would you rather have the IRS lean back and let it all happen, or be well funded and resourced and invested to disrupt? And that's my message. And I hope that message is one that people, if they hear it and it can pierce through the negative talking points that are out there, they'll say, yeah, that makes sense.
Let's go on the first of those first. I gather when you took office, when the IRA passed, modernization, customer service was kind of job one. What have you done on that front? How different are things compared to 2 years ago? And how far is there to go?
Yeah, well, this is a great example of a before and after. So when I tell the story of the transformation of the IRS, we should be able to tell it through the lens of what happened before the IRA and what happened after. So in terms of customer service, and I'm going to focus on 3 ways in which people need to touch the IRS. They need help because the tax system is very complicated and it's scary, and citizens need help in navigating it. And the IRS can be the help they need to figure out what they need to do to comply with the law. So they walk into our walk-in centers. That's one way, and it's a very popular way that people want. They want to sit across the table from someone and talk to someone face to face. We have millions of taxpayers. That's the way they want to engage with us. Before the Inflation Reduction Act, our taxpayer assistance centers across the country were closed and or understaffed, and we had lines around the block and really just inaccessible. Since the Inflation Reduction Act, we've opened every taxpayer assistance center that's been closed. We've opened dozens more. We started Saturday hours so that people can come and if they're working during the week. And we now have pop-up tax assistance centers where we're traveling to remote locations, rural populations, places that are hundreds of miles from the closest taxpayer assistance center. And we're setting up shop there. So we're meeting taxpayers where they are. That is the before and after. With respect to the call center, before the Inflation Reduction Act, we just simply didn't have enough people. We've hired 6,000 new customer service reps. The odds of getting through to the IRS jumped from 20% to near 90% when we did that. And it's a reflection of before and after. The thing about the call center as well is that we also, with resources, can invest in modernizing our call center. And what that means is more callback options. It's everything you get when you call a private sector call center. You get on the phone and they're like, you can wait the 18 minutes or hit 1 and we'll call you back. Well, that actually,
Lifesaver, that makes a huge difference.
it makes a difference. And without money, we can't invest in that solution. And now we have, because of the Inflation Reduction Act. Also, there are things when you call into a private sector call center or a high functioning call center, there are things that lend themselves to not having to wait to speak to a human, that you can hit 1 or 2 or 3 and get the job done, like requesting a transcript, like setting up an installment agreement for the debt that you owe. We have tested, because of the Inflation Reduction Act, we have resources to test different things that taxpayers can do more easily by pressing buttons versus waiting on the phone. That does 2 things. For those people, they get through immediately because they don't have to wait for a person. Plus, it unclogs the line so the people that actually have to get to a person can actually get to them. So that's modernizing the call center. And then our web tools. And I want our web tools to be similar to, if you go to your favorite bank, whatever it happens to be, and you do online banking, things are happening in real time. Like if you were to leave here and go to the ATM machine and pull out $100 and then drive home and log on to your online bank account, they would already have in there that you took $100 out 5 minutes earlier. That's how real time your information is. Not true at the IRS. We have to update both the web and the underlying technology so that we can provide that real-time data. Years and years and years of underfunding meant that we don't have the infrastructure to serve taxpayers in the same way your bank can. This is the before and after the Inflation Reduction Act. That's the transformation that we're taking on to make us more accessible and to allow taxpayers to have a much more positive, modern experience when they engage with us.
Right. So this notion of trust is connected to yes, nobody likes paying taxes, especially if it's a situation where you're facing penalties or fees. But if it at least feels like a fair experience where you're treated well and can get somebody on the phone, it helps on the trust side.
Yeah, I think you have to know your role. Like, and I feel like the IRS, I equate us to the NFL referee, right? Nobody's throwing a parade for us. When we get the call wrong, which we do sometimes, 80,000 people will boo us. When we get the call right, 80,000 people will boo us. I was watching football this weekend and I saw it happen a few times. And that's just the job, right? But you need the ref. With no ref, no game, right? And I think what we need to do is demonstrate to the American people that we're trying to be better and better refs. We're going to institute instant replay to try to make sure we get the call right. We're going to apologize when we get the call wrong and talk about how we're training our referees to get better and better at the job. It's really about a dialogue with the American people about what our agenda is and what our true north is that we haven't had as effectively as we could. And it's hard. It's hard to penetrate in any, I mean, it's probably hard 30 years ago to get a message out to the American people. Today, the media ecosystem is very complicated. That doesn't mean it's not worth trying. And so I think it starts with what's our message? What's our agenda? What's our priorities? One of the ways in which we can demonstrate is by actually generating results. And it's amazing when I hear from taxpayers that, hey, I can get through to the IRS now. That's great. It's heartbreaking when I hear that they can't. But as long as we're telling the story of what we're trying to achieve, I think we're doing our part to try to build that trust gap.
So the second point you made was about enforcement. I gather this is customer service was the first area of emphasis. A lot of hiring now of agents. How's that going? I understand it's been hard to ramp up the way you had intended.
I mean, it is. I mean, Max, you've been a student of government for a long time. I have never seen an ambition for the number of people we have to hire in a short period of time. It is in a tight labor market. There's a whole variety of different challenges that go into scaling the hiring that we're doing. You know, our HR operation has to scale, you know, onboarding, getting everyone into the system, training. It is very, very complicated, high wire act to hire that many people. But it's important. I think we're having, I would say there are moments where I look at the numbers and our progress and I say, this is incredible. Thousands of people are coming into the IRS successfully. And there are moments where I look at it and I say, we are so far behind where we need to be. So like anything that's big and bold, it's mixed. We are transitioning right now from where this past fiscal year, as we close out the fiscal year, our center of gravity was on hiring customer service. Coming into the new fiscal year, our center of gravity is in hiring exam and audit personnel. And we learned a lot in hiring customer service. So I'm hoping we take that learning so that we're getting better and better at this process.
So on the enforcement side, President Biden has made this pledge, no tax increases on people making under $400,000 a year. And that's supposed to be kind of a guiding principle, as I understand it, in using these enforcement dollars. Does that create just operational complexity? You know, isn't part of the problem that somebody might not be paying what they owe? Do they make less than $400,000 or not? How do you think of the challenges of that principle?
Well, I think, first of all, I think it's an exciting opportunity for us to look at the tax gap more broadly, to look at it and it's a complicated set of non-compliance that goes on across the tax gap. When I started my remarks earlier, I mentioned the point that when you underfund a tax agency, and this is just intuitive, right? We are going to more quickly fall behind a sophisticated set of players than we are a less. If I can hire 30 accountants, if I have the means, then it's most likely that I'm going to be more successful in shielding my income than not. And what happens in that space is you have a mixture of evaders, those that are actually intentionally shielding their income inappropriately. And then you have people or entities that are taking too much umbrage, going so aggressive into the gray that their aggressive tax avoidance has crossed too many lines. Now, here's the question. Given a set of resources, are we balanced effectively in terms of where our focus is? Are we doing enough? If you looked at the way the IRS aligned its exam and audit to all of the pieces of the tax gap, is there too much going on in parts of the gap, in particular for middle and low income, and not enough going on in high income, both from a return on investment standpoint, like protecting the government's bottom line, but also this idea of building trust that the enforcement approach that we're taking is equitable and that you are just as likely to hear from the IRS if you're depending on what income strata you're in. And what Secretary Yellen and President Biden had outlined even before I came to the IRS was that the Inflation Reduction Act resources are needed and necessary to close the gap for wealthy and complex taxpayers where we've fallen behind, and not for middle and low income where we've kept pace. And so the remit that I took on was keep the audit rate stable or lower for people earning under 400,000, invest these new resources in the high income. And that's what we're doing. And we've made several announcements in the past few months about how we are taking the Inflation Reduction Act and focusing on things like we just announced recently, 1,600 millionaires and billionaires that owe back taxes. That's where we're focusing. We've deployed a new AI tool that's helping us see patterns in financial behavior that cause risk. And we've applied it and asked the AI tool to select 75 of the largest LLCs or partnerships in the country that are raising the red flags. Those 75s will be getting audit letters soon. These are the types of things that not only are good things to do from a tax, but also if you're sitting at home, middle and low income, and you're like, well, the IRS is going to be, coming at me. I want them coming at the wealthy guy down the street. The reality is that you have a very low likelihood of being audited by the IRS. Most people are honestly just trying to meet their civic responsibility to do their taxes. And where I want the Inflation Reduction Act focus for middle and low income is helping, partnering, being accessible. And where I want the Inflation Reduction Act being for high wealth complex is oversight, scrutiny, making sure that you're playing by the rules.
So the flip side of that is, as I understand it, a de-emphasis of earned income tax credits audits. Tell me about that. How does that fit in?
Yeah, so we recently announced that as part of this rebalance, we are substantially reducing the number of audits on the Earned Income Tax Credit program. This is a program we have a series of refundable tax credits that are intended to be a lifeline for low income. And historically, there's been very high audit activity on these refundable credits. And we're not eliminating the audit activity. This is a rebalance. We're taking a fresh look and saying, does this make sense? Does it make sense that there's all this heavy audit activity on low income versus shifting that audit activity to wealthy and then bad actors of any wealth? And so this is all part of a rebalance. And I believe that we can do it in a way where we continue to have good program integrity in our refundable credits and not lose ground. So it's a win-win, because my intention is to make sure that we are continuing to make progress in program integrity in the refundable credits, but taking those resources and channeling them to what I believe to be higher and better use for tax administration.
Also, seems like part of the challenge is part of why there was an emphasis on EITC was more automatable and algorithmic. These are more boutique, unique situations with partnerships and small business.
Yeah, I think we can go through a history of, and I've studied it, but I don't know that we have time here in terms of why that outcome happen? Why are there so many audits in low income refundable credits versus high income? And there's a complicated set of root causes there. One of them is what you just described, which is it's easier to issue an audit in that context than it is for a Fortune 500 company or a complex partnership that has subsidiaries overseas. And but there is just because that root cause exists, now we have an opportunity to again reset. And the Inflation Reduction Act provides us the resources, the bandwidth, and the ability to do this type of reset. So the transformation that Max started with is not just about new technology and new tools. It's broader than that. It's really changing hopefully the way the places where the IRS emphasizes. So in areas like the earned income tax credit, I'd rather the story be how are we helping people connect to the benefit more effectively? How are we helping them get it right the first time? There are, according to research, millions of taxpayers that are eligible for this lifeline that are not coming to the IRS and getting the benefit. This is a very different mindset for how people think about the IRS. It's the same thing with the victims of tax schemes. I want people to see the IRS, a well-funded IRS, as stepping in and disrupting tax schemes, helping people that are being exploited. If you have someone in your family who's elderly, for example, there's a risk that they're going to get a phone call from someone claiming to be from the IRS, and they're going to scare that person into thinking that they owe a tax debt that they have to pay immediately. And they're going to convince that vulnerable elderly person to pull out their credit card and to provide their credit card number and to pay a non-existent tax debt. And this makes me lose sleep at night. It's troubling to me that this exists. And again, I want people to think about the IRS as the entity that can come in and help and disrupt. You know, when I think about trust in government, just to kind of broaden it a bit, I think about when is the moment that people have the most trust in government? What are these like iconic moments where people either rely on the government and are proud of their government and say the government's going to figure this out? So it's like the moment, like the baby down the well, right? When the baby is down the well and we need to solve it, you know, the 911 phone call, the government, there's comfort in knowing that more and more layers of government are coming in to solution to how to get the baby down the well. The Deepwater Horizon oil spill. How are we going to plug that thing? It's just gushing oil out into the Gulf. So scary and depressing. And people were like, well, the government's on top of it and they are going to harness resources, the best of American resources, partner to close that hole and get it done. And people like were confident that the American government could figure this out. There's a moment of trust there. And I think there are moments where the IRS actually, in helping prevent that elderly person from being duped, there are moments where we have people that are struggling, where we are helping them get that earned income tax credit. There are moments where people are confused, where our customer service reps are now trained increasingly on emotion and empathy that can help and be empathetic in that moment to help a taxpayer through a tough moment when they're on the phone with us because they got through to us quickly. This is that trust moment. I know we have a long way to go, but this is an agenda a well-funded IRS can start to move in that direction. Hopefully I can get it started and future generations of IRS leaders and employees can finish the job.
So on the scams stuff, how much of that is something you can do anything about versus law enforcement, the FTC? I mean, what can the IRS do?
It is like, I'll give you an example of something we've already done, right? So we ended unannounced home visits or office visits by IRS employees. This has been in place for decades. One of the main reasons we ended it is because I want to tell the American people, if someone is knocking at your door, claiming to be the IRS, and you don't have an appointment, it's not the IRS. And now that's a tool, right? And there are other potential tools that we can use, like the QR code on the piece of paper that takes you to the right website to know that this letter is not from the IRS or it is from the IRS. There are innovations that I'm want industry to help with, to basically say, what are the new apps on your phone or the new ways? It's like the way in which innovations can tell you if something's written by ChatGPT. Like, how do we harness that type of technology so that people know that this is a scam, this isn't real versus this is real? And there's a big education campaign that needs to go on here as well to, and we have a network. One of the fascinating things that I've learned is that the IRS, partnering with state tax offices and private industry, has done amazing things in the last 3 or 4 years to combat identity theft used for refund fraud. And they've made real progress there. And it's like alerts go out and there's collaboration and there's, people, experts scrubbing the dark web to figure out where the scams are coming and originating from. So we're getting ahead of it. So there is partnership and infrastructure in place that is tackled part of the scam portfolio. But these scams move quickly. And there's parts of the scam portfolio where we don't have those partnerships and those alerts. And I want to use Inflation Reduction Act money to stand some of that stuff up.
You referenced AI as part of the kind of effort to target enforcement. How much potential is there to not automate, at least use some of these new tools to make your agents, your enforcement staff work smarter, better?
So much opportunity. I mean, like, good news or bad news, we're starting from the ground up in terms of how we deploy AI. There's ways in which we can leverage AI in our call center so that we are routing calls more quickly, more smartly, that we're increasing the number of ways in which automation can help taxpayers versus not. Chats we can set up, and now I'm very attentive to it. Anytime I'm on a website and a chat pops up, I always say yes now, because I'm trying to learn, like, how did this all work and what is and I know that I'm talking to a computer, but very often it gets the job done. And we have and here's the important clarification. Many leaders, especially in government, when they start talking about automation and AI, there's this all of a sudden like, are we displacing federal workers? I don't have that problem. We are hiring and we are behind in hiring. So I could advance all the AI I can think of, and we still are hiring because the volume of work that we have is so significant that unless we both hire and deploy AI, then backlogs will emerge and the system will clog. So we have to fight this war on many fronts. And AI can be used in the call center and once the return comes in, we, for example, recently, and this is kind of another important inflection about how to think about the IRS pre and post IRA, paperless. So this picture that was in the Washington Post of the Austin, Texas cafeteria IRS facility filled with returns that had not been.
The cafeteria, because there wasn't enough storage.
Literally the cafeteria, literally paper returns yet to be processed, right? And so to me, this is like lands in my lap as like the perfect juxtaposition of what we can do with the Inflation Reduction Act, which is we got to get off paper. And so what we announced last month was to get off paper. So this is two things. One, taxpayers should have the option to do everything digitally. We're not there yet, but we're with this effort, we're trying to get to a full digital option. Any correspondence, any form. You might be thinking, wow, it's not already like that. It's not. And that goes back to 12 years of underfunding. And the fact is we didn't have the capacity to make it possible that everything could be submitted digitally. We're working on that. And then because we meet taxpayers where they are, and I've spoken to taxpayers, some taxpayers, they want to stick with paper. And other international tax jurisdictions aren't allowing it. We will allow it. And so if you submit paper, we got to manage the paper. And I want that all scanned into machine readable before it leaves the mailroom. And then, so now we have all digital AI can start to come in and help us increase the efficiency and the effectiveness of our transaction processing, quicker refunds, quicker resolution, more efficiency. It's a virtuous circle.
So last question, is there a risk that you're under funding pressure in the coming years? Could there be regression on customer service? All these things we're talking about. What's the outlook?
There is, and that's why I feel pressure to embed these solutions. So that's like, okay, you're going to underfund us. That means we can no longer offer this in the call center. That means we can no longer stand up these alert systems for tax scams and tax cheats. Again, if these activities that we undertake are unimpeachably good for America and for the tax system, then I think it's harder to unwind it. It makes my case easier to keep us funded going forward.
We're out of time. Danny Werfel.
Thank you all.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you to Neil and the commissioner for that great conversation. So my name's Lindsay LaFerrier. I'm a director here at the partnership. Thank you all for being here today. So as Max mentioned in the intro, the partnership does a lot of research as part of our work on rebuilding trust in government. We conduct surveys. And as I set up this next panel, wanted to share one of the results from a survey this summer. So we asked folks, in 10 years, will the federal government be more trustworthy, more responsive, and more effective? And unfortunately, less than a third agreed that that would be the case. But as Max also mentioned here at the partnership, we believe that highlighting the good work that is happening in government, the progress that we're making, is key to rebuilding trust. So as I set up the next panel, I want to show a short video of one of our recent Service to America medal winners and the work that she did at the VA to improve customer experience and increase trust.
That adjudicated appeals for veterans' claims that had been denied. And so I had an up close and personal seat at the table to see veterans sort of try to navigate their way through a very complex legal system. And so that really led me to think about, how might we be able to build trust and better experiences with veterans who are having difficulty navigating this giant bureaucracy. And so we really try to help veterans understand what services and benefits are available to them. But back in 2018, we were hearing from veterans, I want to transact with the Department of Veterans Affairs. I don't know where to go. I don't know which website it should be. We're talking to veterans and asked them, which one of these web properties would you naturally gravitate towards? And they came back to us and they said va.gov. We also redesigned that website, co-designed it with veterans to have their top transactions, most important transactions right up front, personal login. They can update their address in one place, have it propagate across multiple systems. Things that we are so used to in our real worlds outside of government, but that veterans really needed and demanded from us that we were able to deliver.
Great. So now I'm excited to introduce our panel who are going to talk about other perspectives they have on rebuilding trust and some additional work that's happening in government to build this or bridge this trust gap. So first, I'm happy to introduce our moderator, Sophia Kai, who is a national politics reporter at Axios. We also have Amanda Bennett, the Chief Executive Officer of the U.S. Agency for Global Media. Sue Fulton, who's the Assistant Secretary of the Office of Public and Intergovernmental Affairs at the Department of Veterans Affairs. And also a recent Service to America Medal winner from the partnership, Dr. Eliseo Perez Estable, who is the Director of the National Institute on Minority Health and Health Disparities at the National Institutes of Health. We can give them all a round of applause as they make their way up here.
Thanks so much for being here. I'm really excited for this conversation. I'd love to start off pretty big picture and we can kind of discuss this at a higher level, and then we can get into the specific agencies that you all have large role in leading. Because I covered politics and have been closely watching the presidential election, we know that there are a lot of candidates that have made it their job to attack the federal government and the federal workforce. Why is it for you and your respective agencies, why is it so important to be combating this narrative? In other words, what is at stake if you neglect this issue? And, we can start with Sue and work this way.
We don't get engaged with the politics of the moment at VA. What works for us is keeping veterans at the center of everything we do. We have the advantage of having, well, I think it's an advantage. I know other people feel the same way about their own organizations, but we feel like we have the best mission in federal government, and that's taking care of veterans, their families, caregivers, and survivors. So we don't regard that narrative. Our focus is on continuing to do the right thing for veterans, continuing to be, so keeping veterans at the center of everything we do, being transparent about our communications, being clear, and making sure that veterans and key stakeholders have the information they need to help veterans. So that's what I have for you.
Amanda?
So I just got the answer by listening to you, because you're saying like, you got the best mission. I'm like, no, you don't. I got the best mission. And that's, I mean, it's mission, right? I mean, you guys all know the narrative. Never mind the candidates. Everybody's got the same narrative, right? You know, the lazy federal worker, doesn't show up for work, doesn't do anything, right? That's the narrative out there. It is completely false. You know, nobody tells the narrative of the fact that, I mean, I've been in private industry my entire life. So I've just been in the federal government for a couple of years now. And the people that are working here are so mission focused. These are people at the top of their game. They could work anywhere. They could make a ton more money than they're working now. They don't have to deal with all the nuttiness of this place. And they do it anyway because they are so enamored of the mission. And I think that's the narrative we have to put out there, is that these people are brilliant. I'm working with brilliant people. Holy mackerel. And I've been at big, you know where I've been. I've been at the Wall Street Journal. I've been at Bloomberg. I've been at big organizations. And these folks are great.
So echoing what my colleagues have said, I think that's part of it, but it goes beyond that, right? I mean, there's a tradition of bashing the federal government that goes way back to the origins of the country. So I do think that we have to reflect a little bit on that narrative and how we promote, or at least message to the American people what the government is doing for you. I think the example that I listened to just earlier from the IRS is a great one. Nobody likes the IRS, right? And yet we see this dynamic leader sort of saying we're transitioning to make it a better service, and creating a narrative of, yes, we're going for the wealthiest groups or the tax cheaters. I think that narrative repeatedly will begin to get some traction with the people. But it's sort of a given. It's people are not going to like you. That's a start. And then you're going to push your mission and really value the people that are around you, because they really are dedicated service. So
I want to get back to the VA. Let's start with something positive, some positive news. With the VA, there's a bright spot with trust. The data shows that nearly 80% of VA customers trust the agency. That's up 20 points since 2016. What has changed? What lessons have you learned?
Well, first off, tracking that data is critically important. And I apologize to all of you that you're stuck with me instead of Barbara Morton you just saw on that video, because Barbara is amazing and I'm fortunate to get to work with her. I think it's first, keeping veterans at the center of everything we do, and Secretary Dennis McDonough talks about that constantly. That's really important. Being transparent in our communications is really important. What really changes the level of trust is delivering on your promise. And there's been a lot of work done not only to deliver the best and most affordable healthcare for veterans in this country, which we do, and independent reviews of VA healthcare of healthcare across the board continually show that VA healthcare is better with better outcomes. The CMS star ratings this year included VA hospitals. Hospitals other than VA hospitals, about 41% get 4 or 5 stars. 71% of VA hospitals get 4 or 5 stars. There's a variety of independent assessments of our healthcare. So delivering, that really does build trust. And then certainly, look, I'm the comms person, right? I'm public affairs. So I also, believe that the way that we communicate with veterans and stakeholders creates an opportunity to build trust. And I'd love to talk about that more, but I think the bottom line to your question is we have to deliver better. Oh, you know what? And I'll talk about something else other than comms. In terms of benefits, since the passage of the PACT Act last year, we've hired a lot more benefits processors. We're doing automated benefits processing. This is the 3rd year in a row where we will have processed a record number of claims for veterans. And I'm talking, last year we beat the record by 12%. This year we're ahead of last year's record by 15%. So delivering, when a veteran files a claim, getting that claim processed and getting the money to them faster and in greater numbers. So if we're serving more veterans with more care and more better benefits than ever before, delivering on that promise, that is going to build trust. I talked too long, but I had to brag.
Terrific. I want to move to Dr. Prez-Stable. What has been the most difficult, right, as we think about coming out of the pandemic, the difficulties of getting people vaccinated? What has been most difficult in your role as you have led the country through such a difficult time? Especially, when we talk about communities who have not had the best relationship with the federal government and medicine.
Well, reflecting on 2020 will go on for some time. But one colleague outside of government said, well, there was this big fire and NIH ran to the fire to see what we could do. And it wasn't just developing the vaccine, which was a remarkable accomplishment with federal government support, but actually doing all the other things on the behavioral front, on the social front, on the economic front to really mitigate the effects of what was really an unknown. I mean, we didn't know if, millions and millions of people were going to die in a short period of time and how were we going to cope. It was really an unknown territory. Developing the vaccine gave us at least a hope that we could have an answer, a medical answer. What we didn't do was be able to then deliver that to the public in a trustworthy way right away. And when the clinical trial that Moderna ran and Pfizer was running their own was launched, 90% of the volunteers were white, middle class or upper middle class individuals. Dr. Collins said, this can't be this way. This pandemic has affected communities of color disproportionately. We need volunteers in this trial that reflect America. And we met with the Moderna CEOs. Out of that effort of saying, how do we get more people to do it? And we gave him advice. We gave the group advice with Jerome Adams there, with Gary Gibbons, my colleague, with Tony Fauci and Francis Collins. We met every Saturday for 4 months to really discuss the numbers. How are you doing? What are you getting? Out of that effort came the recognition, the community engagement. Being in the community was part of our job. And scientists, researchers, clinicians need to be out in the community as well as behind the laboratory, in their office or in the hospital. And many of us knew how to do that because we had been doing it for many years before I got to NIH. And I knew those scientists. And mobilizing them and getting them to act in a way did accomplish getting the communities vaccinated. So a year later, the death rates for COVID across racial and ethnic groups were essentially no different. Vaccination rates were pretty much the same with some regional variations. That was building trust.
Was there one single most effective tool that you would say that allowed you to move from where you started to a year later?
I think communities need to see a human connection. So the way that we think that is most effective to communicate is for people who are there and embrace the message and role model what needs to be done. So, for example, a public service announcement done with all the glitziness of Hollywood, beautiful, good actors, you say, oh, that's a good message. But people see through that versus getting, as I recall, I think it was a news report showing a family physician in New Orleans modeling getting her vaccine, being in a clinical trial. She's African American. Now that delivers a message much more effectively than an actor. You need both, probably, to saturate the market. But I think that's an example. They want to see the scientists. They don't want to just, oh no, we send someone as a rep. They want to see the people who are doing the work and feel like there's a connection there. That recreates more trust in science that we had, that has been perilously threatened in the last several years.
Yeah, and that involves moving through the hurdles such as, the English language, right? Like, what do you say to my grandparents, for instance, who don't speak English, or Black community or other communities who choose to consume different forms of news that may or may not be accurate. I mean, these are
challenges.
Large
Yes.
hurdles. Yeah. Amanda, you've been in media for 4 decades, 5 decades. What is wrong with the media? What is wrong with how we do our jobs?
Oh, where do I begin? Let me tell you one thing. This is not going to be something you hear very often, but one of the things is that we don't know how good we've got it in this country. I think a lot of people, first off, you don't know what my agency does. Let me just tell you real quick what my agency does. My agency oversees the work of the congressionally funded, completely independent media that broadcasts only outside this country and only to countries that don't have a free press. So we're Voice of America, Radio Free Asia, Radio Free Europe, Office of Cuba Broadcasting, and Middle East Broadcasting Networks, as well as we have a special operation that also does circumvention tools that lets us get into closed environments. So we are broadcasting into countries that have no free press. And I'm going to take a risk. I don't think it's a very big risk in saying that between us and the BBC, in about 2/3 of the world, we are the only free press that exists. And not only that, we're the only example anyone has that a free press could possibly exist. So think about that when you think about what's wrong with the media in this country. The media in this country is it's messy, it's contentious, people don't like, but it's free. It's free. And we put what we report, the credible, objective, completely independent news we broadcast around the world, you put it against what most people get, which is a completely government-funded, government-sponsored narrative of what the government wants you to hear. Put it side by side, and you'll see why across the world, our entities have over 70% trust from our audiences around the world. That's more than double what US media has in their own country. So you've got to remember that we're looking at all this stuff in the context of something that is, by definition, it's messy and contentious and says things that people don't want to hear. That's by definition what we do. And as you said, people don't like it. But you know what? We've got it. And when we show it to people in other countries, that's what they want. People, we've got, during the recent the rebellion when Amasya Amina was killed for wearing her headscarf the wrong way, 1 in 4 Iranian adults came to us to find their information, and it is completely and totally illegal for them to look at us, hear us, see us. So they wanted to know the truth badly enough that they took a fair amount of risk. During the invasion from Ukraine, we have 10% market share in Russia, 10% of Russian adults, where it is completely illegal. The broadcasts are blocked, very difficult to get in. And if you think 10% doesn't sound like very much, think about our major American broadcast networks, the two of them, I'm sure you can name yourself. They run about 20-25% market share, right? So in a completely free market, they're only doing double what we're doing in Russia. People want this really badly. And so that's something that, I think we're always going to have to face, is that the things that are free and interesting and messy, they're always going to have people that don't like them. But part of it is we've forgotten how good we've got it. We've just forgotten how good we've got it.
Oh, I'm an even bigger fan of Amanda Bennett than I was before I came in.
Well, welcome to the club.
Yeah, no, I'm actually, can I just weigh in and say, we agree. I mean, we have very contentious media reporting on VA, and sometimes they're not fair. And, I'm sorry if I talk about Dennis McDonough too much, but he sets the tone of, look, they're here to help us. He thanks, we have a monthly press conference. He thanks them every time they come in. They are going to make us sharper. They're going to make us better. They're going to keep us honest. And in terms of the VA press corps, that's overwhelmingly true. We do have some folks who report on us who don't know the difference between what the Defense Department does and what VA does, and we educate them. So we're very grateful for the media. And, I'm not saying every story about VA is glowing. If any of you read the papers, read the papers. I'm showing my age, right? But yeah, no, I would say net the media, we very much appreciate the press in this country.
But what stands out with what you both have just contributed here is that U.S. standing in the world is impacted by your work, trust in what you do. I mean, isn't that right?
Well, I mean, think about the fact that during big crises around the world, like when a young woman is killed for wearing her headscarf wrong, or when there was COVID demonstrations in the PRC, that people take substantial amounts of risks to come to US broadcasts to find out the truth. Think about that for a second. You when you talk about US standing in the world, that's kind of an abstract concept, but the fact is people are voting with their feet. They're coming to us because they believe us, and they're taking substantial risks to do it. We have a pretty decent audience in North Korea. Okay, just swallow that for a second, right? Think how hard it is for them to get us. All around the world, we stand for trust and freedom.
My next question here for Sue and Dr. Stabel, with the military opening more doors for women, for minorities, you were the first female graduate of West Point to serve on the Board of Visitors. How has the VA evolved to serve, a changing demographic of veterans?
Well, first clarification, I was the first female graduate to chair the Board of Visitors. I was the first openly gay member of the Board of Visitors at West Point, and graduated in the first class with women. I was much younger then. Wait, what was the question? No, look, VA, we understand, women face particular challenges in the military. And have in the past, particularly, even up to today. And, the percentage, there's probably, oh man, my numbers are not going to be right, but say there's approximately 20% of the military is women. The percent of veterans who are women is about half that, right? And so VA has had to make a lot of adjustments in the past 10 years. Now, listen, women are the fastest growing cohort of veterans in this country. We have, the Center for Women Veterans was stood up, gosh, quite a while ago, but we continue to work to be better at serving women veterans. I think, in some cases, the issues for women coming to VA, and I'm trying to think of what the most recent stats are, but let's talk qualitatively, right? The issues for women coming to VA, the providers are prepared and want to serve them and are, fully prepared to do that. Sometimes it's the folks in the waiting room who make it difficult for the, create an environment that makes it difficult for women to navigate that. So in a lot of our facilities, we've literally changed the layout of the medical center so that there's not, I remember years ago in East Orange, New Jersey, you had to just walk the gauntlet of cat calls to get to your provider if you were a woman veteran. That's not the way it is now. And a lot of them have made those changes. I know for a period of time in New Jersey, we had, there was a separate entrance that you could use. So we continue to, we know that the trust scores among women are lower than the trust scores among men, still high, but lower. So we are continuing to do what we can to demonstrate, to make that experience better for women, and to demonstrate in other ways. I mean, earlier this year, we changed the mission statement of the VA, which used to be to care for him who shall have borne the battle and his widow and his orphan. Instead we're going to, we care for all those who've served in the U.S. Armed Forces and their family caregivers and survivors. We've named facilities after women veterans. So, but we have a ways to go and we know it. So we're going to continue to work on it.
Here that was changed.
That's correct. Just in March. Yeah.
At the NIH, you've been in your role for almost a decade. Is that correct?
8 years.
8 years. How have you seen the NIH evolve in the way that it allocates resources to studying minority health, as well as how have you seen your role evolve? And talk to me about this new NIH Community Engagement Alliance.
Okay, well, I'll comment that on the issue of women, it was 50 years ago, we studied heart disease only in men. And when women were studied, we found out that it was different. that response to medications and outcomes were different because women have much lower risk of events. So I think this is a central, sex as a biological variable, gender identity, sexual orientation, all these factors have been considered, they're scientific factors. In the workplace, in the last 5-6 years, the whole wave of really dismantling any harassment is really become a primary mission of the NIH. Before, we used to get reports, calls from research assistants or investigators saying, there's a toxic work environment, there's sexual harassment. We couldn't do anything. Congress authorized NIH then to at least act. And if someone is found responsible for a toxic work environment, that individual scientist is no longer eligible to receive any NIH funding, and they immediately get removed as principal investigator. So I think those are changes that are tangible that have occurred. With regards to the issue of race and ethnicity and how we view that as again, a scientific factor that accounts for health outcomes that we don't fully understand, interacts closely with socioeconomic status, and therefore the two need to always be measured and considered. That was the mission of National Institute of Minority Health and Health Disparities. That's my own scientific background, as I'm a general internist, a physician, in both caring for patients and in thinking about research questions. And I think it's a message that applies across the agency in all human research. The pandemic just made this all, in your face, so to speak. And to see at the end of March of 2020, Dr. Fauci talk about, the enormous disparities that at that time were becoming evident in the African-American community from COVID, was really sort of the call to say everyone needs to pay attention to this. The alliance, the Community Engaged Alliance, was born out of the efforts we had regarding the vaccine trial. We didn't really mobilize or stood up the alliance in time to impact what was done with the vaccine trial. The vaccine trial, that Moderna made the changes to pause recruitment in white volunteers and to emphasize African American, Latino volunteers to get demographic representation in the trial. But the Alliance is trying to build a network of community engagement where, yes, we focus on COVID, we focus on testing, on mitigation measures, and on the vaccine uptake. We think we had contributed to the success of moving the needle in those communities. But now it's a different phase. People don't want to talk about COVID anymore. I don't think there's a couple people here wearing masks. I think it's really like, okay, we're looking at this in the past, but we're pivoting to other things, like chronic COVID or the long COVID, as it's called. You know, we still are trying to figure out how to manage that. Chronic diseases of all kinds, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, cancer. Most common cancers tend to be chronic, not.
So this is all still the Alliance?
Yes, we are moving, we're pivoting that. We haven't yet settled on exactly what topic, but in partnership with the National Heart, Lung, Blood Institute, NIMHD, Dr. Gibbons, the director of that institute, and I will be moving in this direction as we enter this new phase, and not be going year to year, but really thinking in terms of this normal NIH timeline of 3 to 5 years.
I want to start closing here with question about how this issue of eroding public trust impacts the way that you lead personally in your respective roles. And we can just start wherever and go down the line. Amanda?
You know, I work in an environment where we're working against false information and misinformation and disinformation. And the one thing that is the big Achilles heel of misinformation is if people say things that aren't true and people can prove them to be not true. Like abstract things are harder because they go out in the real world. But you know, when the CCP's propaganda machine said that nobody was killed in that train crash back there, and the people in Shanghai said, "Oh yeah, I saw it," that erodes trust and confidence. And so what I try and do is we're trying to make our organization much more impactful, much more efficient, much more straightforward, to make life easier for people inside the organization. And I could say that I'm doing that all I want. I have to show palpable results of it. So one of the things is to make sure that what you're saying is backed up by what you're doing. You can say that we're the most trustworthy organization. You can say that we're making ourselves more efficient, but people have got to feel it. And if people don't feel it, there's no point saying it. You know, storytelling is great, but the basis of storytelling has to be truth.
I mentioned transparency early on. One of the hardest things in transparency is to tell the bad news. And we've worked really hard at VA over the past few years, particularly, but I think before that, but to try to establish a culture where it's psychologically safe to come forward with bad news, to encourage people to come forward with bad news. And we're in August, we had, look, the PACT Act was passed in August of 2022. That expanded VA care and benefits to those impacted by toxic exposures, Agent Orange burn pits, but a variety of other things. And it really changed what we were able to do at VA because it was such a huge expansion. But in order to get like the full backdating of your benefits to the date of the bill signing, you had to file by August 10th. So we talked about this August 10th deadline, not that PACT would be over, but that in order to get your full benefits, you should file by August 10th. Well, we got to that last week, and the volume of people on va.gov trying to get their intent to file in before that deadline just shot up and shot up. And then we found out on August 8th that 20% of people going to va.gov were getting an error message. shades of right healthcare.gov. And did I mention who my secretary was? So, but here's what happened at VA. By the time they brought it forward immediately, pulled everybody together, emergency meeting, and we figured out that even the people getting the error message, many of those veterans, we actually were logging their intent to file. Okay, so they thought they weren't filing, but they actually were. Others, we had captured their info. So we laid out a plan that day, within a couple of hours, that everybody who had gone to the site, even if they got an error message, was going to get the backdating, right? Then the second thing was we put it out everywhere. We changed the error message, right? Because we hadn't quite figured out how to stop the error message from happening because it was overload. We changed the error message to say, we've got you, but you can't go forward anymore, right? We changed notices. We put it out publicly. We went and told all our stakeholders, of course, on the Hill and everybody. And even though we were capturing everybody, this took a little bit of time, but we found authority to be able to extend by 1 week. And by going out, we had this horrible thing that happened. But the net of that is we actually built trust. Now, what happened internally was people saw that those who brought this forward and those who were rewarded. And so we've actually had a couple of things since then. I'm not going to walk through them because you can read the news. We've had some things, and some of them were caught right as they happened. Some of them people surfaced, a couple of them people surfaced that had been happening since 2018, that there's this glitch where, we did a system changeover. And, this group, if they started before and they came back to finish, complete it, they were somehow lost. So things have been surfacing. Every time it surfaced, we're doing a notification to all stakeholders and quite often to the press.
Better at communicating that.
Better at communicating bad news. And we've actually gotten, staffers on the Hill throwing up their hands like, you guys are coming to us telling us bad news about yourselves. What's going on? I think that's really important. It's really important. Now, you can't just tell the bad news and not say, here's how we're going to fix it, make sure it never happens again. And here's how no veteran will be harmed. That was key impact. No veteran will be harmed. But it is hard to change a culture, and a number of governmental organizations I've worked with in the past don't have that culture, but it is hard to get to a culture where you reward people for bringing forward the bad news and then you get it out, you fix it. And I think that's a huge way to counter misinformation as well as build trust.
Yeah, I would agree that transparency is important. In science, in NIH, we're based on data, right? So we have to be loyal to that, to be guided by the data and interpretation of that. What I think we often don't do, especially in NIMHD kind of issues, is we don't communicate good news very effectively of the advances in health. Everyone is always pointing to the adversity, the disparities, the inequities, and that's what drives a lot of what we do and say. But there have been good trends, good developments that have happened in health in the last 20 years. And I see that both scientists and the media tend to underemphasize that aspect of what is coming out of the scientific realm or the medical realm, and emphasize the bad news. But overall, if we stay with the facts, we stay with science, we try to be transparent in how we make decisions, I think that's really important. Gaining the trust for me is first of all, our staff, right? So they have to trust you in government. Government has authority, so there's a certain authority instilled, but any organization functions that way. Second, who's our immediate sort of constituents? It's the scientists out there who ask us for funding. And of course, that grows out from there. But the general public comes to us as well, and they want to get trustworthy information. So if you search for a medical question of any kind, and I do that too, an NIH website will inspire a certain amount of trustworthiness as much as a academic health center website. I think that's something that we need to pay attention to constantly.
I want to open up to questions. I think there are maybe a few mics going around. So just specify who the question is for. Otherwise, I do have one rapid fire, but up here in the front. All right, go for it.
Okay. Hi there. Wonderful conversation. And I'm familiar with the work that the VA is doing around employee experience. And I think it's really critical that we not only focus on those customer experiences. So I'm curious about your thoughts around what else government can do in order to improve the employee experience and increase trust in those measures.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. I have that in my notes, but I didn't figure out a way to work it in. That the same way that we measure veteran experience in V signals, we've launched E signals to measure the employee experience. And part of that is understanding, that we have the right work environment. And there's a lot of ways that we do that. That we assess our organizations, but we also want to know, back to, are we creating an environment where people can feel comfortable raising issues? You can only, I think it's true that you can only really improve the things that you measure. So now that we've started measuring this, we look to improving. Now we've had, our annual employee survey in the past, and we continue to use that, but this is a different way to look at what the daily experience of VA employees is, and we look forward to improve it. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
Yep, up here in orange.
Thank you, in green. Sydney Heimbrock with Qualtrics, and I actually did a lot of international development in the first half of my career. So I'm very curious, how are you engaging with the communities that you're trying to reach to actually understand their perceptions of your work? And then how do you take that data to adjust your approach in communicating?
Sure, there's a couple of ways. For one thing, we broadcast around the world in 63 different languages, and they're all separate newsrooms, all staffed mainly with people from those countries and from those communities. And so these are people who have very deep experience and knowledge of those countries. And our stringer network is also coming from the ground. For example, we have 200 or so, Radio for Europe has 200 or so journalists in Ukraine right now on the ground, probably one of the biggest news contingents around. So one of the ways we engage with our communities is by coming from those communities. So our people are making their news decisions by the way they would make things here, by being around. And so the other way is, well, there's two other ways. We measure our audience the same way a domestic news organization would measure their audience, by going in with Gallup surveys into these countries. Now, some of the places like China or PRC, we can't do that anymore because we can't get in there. But the fact that we're moving increasingly to digital, the Radio Free in our name is a little misleading because that's what we started as. But we're very largely digital, and we're moving increasingly to digital. Gives you an on the ground immediate feedback. You get real time feedback about what's going on. You can watch what people are doing. And in fact, one of the things I really like is during big news events like the State of the Union or inauguration or debates, something like that, is going down and watching our Facebook broadcasts into various countries and flipping from country to country and watching whether it's hearts or thumbs or fire or flames going across the screens. You can see immediately how people are reacting to things, what's important to them. And it's different from country to country. Like I remember during the debates 6 years ago, I watched the Spanish language broadcast and it'd be all hearts, hearts, hearts. You go over to the Hausa thing or the Farsi thing, it'd be all flame, flame, flame. So it goes different ways, but we can actually see it and react to it. It's really cool.
Yeah.
Hi, you guys were talking a little bit about how a lot of the people who work at your agencies are very passionate. And I know that Amanda talked a little bit about how these people could be getting paid a lot more in the private sector. So how do you, I guess anyone can answer this, how do you guys recruit and attract really valuable and intelligent people to work at your agencies?
I'll tell you what I do. You talk about bad news, I lean into it. I say, I'm not going to be able to pay you a fraction of what you're actually worth. You know, can't do it. And you know what? You're going to work harder too, and it's going to be really hard. But you know what? You're going to be doing something that makes a difference in the world, and you can go have a much better paying job and one with less hours. But you know what? At the end of the day, will you know that you did something really different? Would you know? And you know something? It doesn't work with everybody, but it certainly works with the right people. The people that respond to that are the people I want to have working with me.
I would say the hardest thing from NIH perspective is physicians who, reach the top of the GS scale very quickly, even in the lowest paid specialties. But I would argue that the security and compensation, outside of an entrepreneurial career is pretty good for most other workers. And so it's usually not a major issue in the conversation for our hiring, other than trying to get physicians to see the value of the mission and to do a different kind of work. And we often negotiate, well, you can do one day, either on your own to increase your pay. We've done that to retain and to keep them vibrant. We also have implemented the student loan repayment program for education. It's been very good uptake with staff within the extramural side. It already had existed for the intramural scientists. And that's been, I think, a good motivation for the staff. They can get direct payments, repayment on their student loans. And I was surprised at how many people still owed money for their education. It had nothing to do with how recent their education had finished. So that was, I think, a really good thing for a very small investment, really, to make people feel better about their work environment.
And I just realized I gave a completely bad message. Like, anybody that has any influence for this, figure out how to pay my folks more. Okay. All right. They're worth it. Okay. Thank you.
Amanda has spoken.
Yeah, and I'm going to start with thanking Congress for the hiring authorities that they have given us to pay, particularly our physicians and our healthcare providers. But the mission is a huge drawing point. It's a positive recruiting point. And VA does so much cutting edge research. Most people aren't aware. We've been trying to work to do better with comms. That ARM, kind of has their own communications, but we do a lot of cutting edge research at VA. Yes, we fund a lot of it, but we also do a lot of it at VA. And so that's another, I think the experience pieces of it, who you're serving and what you're able to do. We make that count where we can't quite stack the money as high.
You got time for maybe one last question.
Thank you very much. Tim Rund, I'm a retired government guy, but a strategic advisor to a company called The Clearing. This is an unbelievably rich panel. I really love the diversity of the different agencies. I wasn't aware of the U.S. Agency for Global Media, and I'm really excited about it. I have a question for Sue about one of the things you heard Danny Werfel talking about is this new technology in terms of trying to figure out how to connect. Some of it is about chatbots and that kind of stuff. One of the things I think we all deal with is being put on hold, and you've got these long wait times. One of the emerging technologies is something known as conversational AI. Are you exploring that in terms of like it's an avatar bot that essentially you can have a conversation with that weeds out where you need to go first instead of pushing 1, pushing 2, pushing 3? But the idea is intended to reduce the wait time. I'm just curious whether or not VA is exploring it. Thank you.
I don't have an answer for you. I'm so sorry. We have a number of call centers, and yeah, I don't. A lot of we do our best to get them to a person because of the character of our population, right? Mostly older. We also field a lot of calls of from people in distress. That said, we're always looking at new technologies. I don't know if we're specifically looking at that for the call center though.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to have this conversation, and thanks for hanging out.
Thank you.
Thank you all. See where I should have before, right?
Thank you.
Point at it. I get it now. I wasn't following you. Thank you.
Thank you so much to that incredible panel. I was told by my colleagues on the live stream that I needed to lean closer to the mic. So it's great. I have a handheld mic now. I can hold it as close as I want. So now in our agenda, we're going to go to some breakouts to talk about two of the topics that came up on this panel. How does government data and transparency help rebuild or create trust for the public? Or how can agencies and others use strategic communications to think about telling the story of government differently and shape the narrative? So to join these breakouts, you can go to 608 for the conversation about government data with Richard Coffin, the Chief of Research and Advocacy at USA Facts, or 606 with Donna Garland, the Deputy Associate Administrator for Client Engagement at the General Services Administration. Partnership staff will be around to help direct you if you need your way to find your way, and we'll be back after a break at 11:10.
Already transitioned out of a whole bunch of them. Since the chemicals that we are transitioned out of a whole bunch of them. Since I started at EPA, the chemical cooling the car you drive, the chemicals that we are transitioning out of, it's really great that you don't know that we've already transitioned out of a whole bunch of them. Since I started at EPA, the chemical cooling the car you drive has changed twice, and you probably didn't notice. Fire extinguishers have changed. The foams that are used to blow the cushioning in the seat you're sitting in or in the refrigerator door have all changed to better, more sustainable substances, and nobody noticed. So part of my job is to do things without anybody knowing that we did it. Public service is an opportunity to give back to society and to work in a job you appreciate, on issues you are concerned about and care about, and make a difference. Watching these chemicals get phased down and seeing the ozone layer start to heal and have an opportunity now to address climate change using those same tools, you just don't get those opportunities anywhere else.
Great. Thank you all for coming back from break. I hope you had a fantastic discussion. So that video there just spotlighted Cynthia Newberg, who's another one of our Service to America Medal winners in recent years. So now we're going to have a conversation about shaping the public's perception of government and the role that government and other organizations have in shaping that narrative and conversation. So one of the surveys questions that we recently asked when we did some public perception research was asking how the public perceives government and how often they hear negative and positive stories. So almost 90% of people said they heard negative stories often or sometimes. On the flip side, less than 30% said they heard positive stories with the same frequency, which when we're talking about rebuilding trust in government is not the state we want of things. And we also asked them a question about how they think the news media and television shows portray the federal government and whether they think it's accurate. And in both cases, they didn't think that it was accurate. So for the conversation today, we're going to dig into a little bit more, how do these organizations and sectors kind of shape the perceptions of government and talk about these things? And we're really excited for a fantastic conversation led by our moderator, Eugene Scott, who's a senior politics reporter at Axios. He's joined by David Bornstein, who's the co-founder and chief executive officer of the Solutions Journalism Network. Peter Latham, who's the managing director of media at Emerson Collective. Candace McFarlane, who's the chief creative officer at CineReach. And David Shipley, the editorial page editor at the Washington Post. Let's give them a round of applause and welcome them.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I would love to start this conversation off about trust in government and the role of the media plays in that by hearing about our panelists' personal experience or perception of government before they got into this current work. If they had a lot of trust or concerns or issues with it that perhaps may even shape how they view government now and the work they do. And I ask in part because I'm a DC native, and like most DC natives, my parents worked in government, and so I did not realize that so many people disliked government, quite frankly, until I became a political reporter. Uh, and it, you know, and it's because my parents did what I thought was very valuable and important work, and you know, I viewed all these things through rose-colored lenses, and so it's been fascinating being on this side of this conversation and realizing that a lot of the people who consume our media did not grow up on Capitol Hill and whatnot, and which is good for them, quite frankly, because you know, maybe if I grew up on Capitol Hill right now, I'd have a very different view of government. But I would love to hear some of your stories. What were your thoughts of government before you got involved in telling people about government? And if you could hold your mics as close as possible, I don't think the live stream is picking up the sound as well as we would like.
Well, I think sadly, most of my experience with government prior to this work was watching television, which is ultimately what I produce now. But like so many people, whatever I saw in a film or TV, I just sort of assumed is what was going on. So whatever they told me, which for the most part was either about corruption or ignorance, that's kind of how it's represented because that's what's entertaining and that's what keeps people tuning back in. It's really what I thought. And then I ended up going to school here in DC and saw really the spectrum of government, what it meant, how hard people worked, so many roles that I didn't even understand were part of the government, all becomes very clear when you live here, especially for those 4 years. So that really sort of shifted my understanding just living in the space and inspired me to want to use television and film to do the opposite and tell more authentic stories about this kind of work.
I would say I grew up in New York on Long Island, and my parents were very politically disengaged and apathetic. My favorite memory of anything involving politics was standing on my street corner when Ronald Reagan was going to William Casey's funeral, and my house was in the middle of his route from the helicopter landing pad to the church. And my brother and I stood out there and waved at Nancy and Ronald Reagan. You could see their limo. That was very exciting. But we never talked about politics in my house. I guess my parents were sort of Philistines or Philistines. How do you say that word, David? I pursued a journalism career. So I think from the perspective of the journalism organizations that I work for, you know, the attitude toward politics is, you know, all the cliches, you know, holding power to account and afflicting the comfortable and stuff like that. So that's over the past, you know, couple of decades how I have viewed the political world.
Yeah, I grew up in Montreal, Canada, where I think probably had more of an appreciation about government just because you could go to college for almost no money and you can go to the doctor without having to think about it. So these things actually, but when I became a journalist, I mean, as you know, as Peter was saying, the role was very much to catch bad guys. You know, sunlight is the best disinfectant. You were always looking for germs to kill. And so the perception was that the private sector was the effective sector and doing all these things well, and government people were not very effective. And this was like a really bad brand problem that I later realized when I started reporting on social innovation, which is what I've been doing for about 30 years. So many of the people that I wrote stories about around the world were working working through government, and I got to interview people who are actually working inside the systems. And that's when I realized that my image was very distorted, that all the integrity and problem solving and creativity in government was actually hidden, systematically hidden from public view. And the problems were the things that were always being led with. So there was a very deeply biased and imbalanced view that the public was getting.
Three quick perspectives. One, I grew up and came of age in Oregon at a time when the politics of the possible was actually a reality. It was bipartisan. You saw it every day in Portland with light rail coming in and an urban growth boundary and a bottle bill and a congressional delegation that actually had a voice in idiosyncratic things, whether it was Mark Hatfield on disarmament or Bob Packfield on fiscal issues. So I'm by nature hopeful, or grew up in a world where that possibility was really manifest. The second point is, having spent time in the Clinton administration as a speechwriter and trying to be persuasive about government, trying to find ways to make real the things that you were trying to do and communicate them, which was a challenge, but an exciting one, and one that did have some moments of possibility and success, at least in my limited time there, thanks to Bill Clinton's persuasive capacities. And then the third bit, as an opinion editor over time, seeing so many opportunities missed by people sending in op-ed pieces with really valuable things to say, but saying them in a way that would do nothing to open up the possibility and the excitement and the potential for progress enshrined in the idea. So those would be the three things I'd offer.
I started with that question because I think historically, media and specifically mainstream, dare I say, elite journalism likes to think of itself as, more objective and neutral than is actually humanly possible. We all show up with stories and perspectives that shape and influence how we do what it is that we do. And I thought it would be valuable for each of us to hear how that's influenced each of us in our work. And I would love to hear now, based on what it is that you do, what role do you think media, the TV, film, journalism plays from a place of responsibility in helping people trust or mistrust government?
I mean, the part I would focus on from my very particular corner is opinion pages, and especially the open space where the intelligence of the world is allowed to come into this area and make its case. And so to make a plea or to try to give some sense or start a dialogue about what we're looking for that might lead to more persuasive writing from government actors so that they can make their case in an authentic way. Because if it comes across as authentic and not as something produced by the giant op-ed machine that resides somewhere on Massachusetts Avenue, then you have a chance of actually persuading people. And if you're persuading people, you're building trust. And there are so many ways of communicating these days that go beyond the customary 820 words that go down the side of a page, ways that are persuasive to people, to really try to invite you or to extend an invitation to try as many different ways of communicating with people as possible. And that does mean taking some risks. And that does mean opening up some of the doors that are traditionally closed.
Yeah, I would say that the field of journalism really needs to rethink its theory of change. The basic idea of journalism, or a lot of journalism, is that the world will get better when we show people how bad things are. And I actually think that, there's a lot to be learned from and shared with the public about how problems get solved. Now, the thing is, our organization has been working to legitimize the idea of solutions journalism, which is rigorous reporting that looks at how people are responding to problems, the success or failure, and what we can learn from it. There's so much going on that people don't realize within government, really smart problem solving, people using, today using data much more effectively to understand patterns and respond to things much better. And the average citizen has no clue how much they're benefiting on a daily basis at the local level or regional levels from things that are happening, how much they're being protected by things they never have to think about. And I think journalism, by focusing so much on the successes of the private sector, that the magazines are called Money, Success, Fortune, Fast Company. When Donald Trump comes down the escalator and says, I'm a businessman, I'll fix everything. There's a narrative that supports him in doing that. There's not a narrative that supports people in government saying, we fix a lot of things. That's a story that journalists are uncomfortable telling because of this sort of professional bias that our job is really ultimately to, to find, sunlight is the best disinfectant, to find the germs. And that's a bias that I think really needs to be reexamined.
I think at the national level, the previous administration has done enormous damage to the trust of national publications that I think were previously thought to be mostly, honest brokers and fair, accurate reporters of the news. So the Washington Post, at Emerson Collective, where I work, we're involved with the Atlantic, places like CNN. And for the past 7.5 years I've been at Emerson, one thing we have focused on, not so much at the national level, but really looking at local journalism and the role that it can play in help building trust at the state and community level. So, it's been reported to the point where these are all cliches, the crisis in local news. The news loves to report on itself. My boss calls it a self-licking ice cream cone. We just love talking about ourselves. So newspapers are dying, reporters have lost their jobs. And, what we've decided is that the for-profit local news model is imperiled and it's not coming back. And the only way to solve the local journalism crisis or help solve it is in the nonprofit realm. And we've been supporting local news organizations around the country that are really prospering and showing that local news can be an effective form of delivering fair, accurate information and holding local leaders to account. And I'm happy to talk more about those later, but that's where we are focusing our energies in the trust department.
I think for entertainment, it's probably uniquely suited in how influential it is to this process and how little responsibility it chooses to bear, right? If you look at the reporting and the statistics, the level of information, influence, and then behavior that's affected by what you watch on TV, whether that's a reality show, what you're streaming, completely affects the world that we live in, but there's really no one's holding folks accountable for that. And so I think there's a huge responsibility, and I think the shift is in just being honest about whether you intend to or not. Our industry is fundamentally shaping the world in ways that we have to really be honest about. One visual that always helps me is, I don't know if anyone has young kids here, but my kids are obsessed with these YouTube videos with the domino setup. You've seen this? People take hours and days to set these dominoes up so intricately that by the end, you knock it down really quickly and maybe a ball gets ejected and makes its way into a hoop, right? And I think of pretty much any sweeping cultural movement, any social progress, it is that setup of dominoes. Some of those are legislative, some of that is advocacy, and some of those are content and storytelling. So if we're in a given social movement, if we're meant to be domino 14, and we are not in deep conversation and relationship with dominoes 1 through 13, we're not well informed. We're not telling the story so that we can use all our weight, the power of storytelling, to knock down the domino after us. So I think there's a lot of trust that needs to be built within industry and within relationship between government and entertainment so that those stories are more authentic. And I think artists and creators and producers have to be more open to what entertainment looks like and that there are other ways of entertaining folks in this realm beyond stories of corruption, like I mentioned earlier. We all love that and it's binge worthy, but there are other ways to keep people engaged.
Sometimes I wonder if we're just in an uphill battle when it comes to trust. You know, when I covered the first half of my career was in local news, which I loved, out in real America and Phoenix and Kansas City and Charlotte. And I often met people who were very critical of government and loved to remind me of how few people trust the government. And my response, which wasn't that great, was usually that, well, trust is decreasing in religion and the military and so many other institutions as well. And there are lots of reasons for that. One of them, I believe, is that we know more. We have social media and people are just exposed to the ins and outs and workings of these institutions, perhaps in a way that we just weren't 30, 40 years ago. Is that a fair guess or assessment in terms of why trust maybe has declined, that people just know more about the inner workings of these institutions?
Okay, we'll go this way. I thought we were going back and forth. But see, we found a way to develop trust among this group. You know, it's interesting because maybe part of the answer to this is, do we think enough about what it takes to earn someone's trust or to be persuasive in a way that that builds trustworthiness? I think of just in opinion journalism, especially in an age where there are so many expressions of outrage, and trust in response to those expressions of outrage is ever diminishing. Do you then do the opposite to try to create a more trusting framework? And what would that look like? What would be the building blocks of a journalistic undertaking that would model and exemplify trust? Would it be that everything you write has to exhibit some form of cognitive empathy? That you have to make clear to the reader that you have interrogated everything in the universe that you're talking about before you're landing on your view? Is it to look for signage or ways to make clear that the work, even if it's opinion, grows out of a quantitative place? That is, what can you do to show that you have actually reported, that you have drawn material from the real world, and then use that to shape your view? And to David's point a little bit, how do you, this isn't for a news story, more for opinion, how do you make clear a prescription? How do you offer a way out of the fix you're in, the situation that you're trying to address? And so maybe, you know, I agree with all of that, Eugene, you know, and all the numbers bear that out, at least from our small corner of the world. Trying to think about the elements that build trust in a story is probably the most effective way that I could start, sort of piece by piece, and making sure that as many of those pieces as possible reflect some of those elements that may, if we get really lucky, over time, build a relationship where the reader says, okay, they've done their homework, and I'm going to stick with them.
Yeah, I totally agree with with everything David said. Well, one of the things that we found, and we work with a network of news organizations and thousands of journalists, and the field of journalism is grappling with the issue of trust very much as well. Do people trust journalism? And one of the things that we found is that trust is not necessarily only a function of accuracy. It's actually a function of whether people feel you have their backs. Like, I don't care what you know until I know that you care, is really a statement that we've heard in going out into communities. And so if one of the things we talk about for our news partners is, how can you show people that your news is being really trying to be radically helpful to them? help them understand their options to solve the problems they're facing in their communities. And people are suffering mental health issues, climate crisis, the economy, immigration. There's so many things that people are dealing with now. There's actually a really big opportunity to rebuild trust in journalism and in government by speaking directly to the pain that is out there in the land, and by showing people. Now, it's not a question of always trusting the government. It's like, here are a bunch of cases where, they've really earned your trust. And here are a bunch of cases. There's no blanket trust for anything, but you can really, really focus on, these are the policies, these are the programs. I mean, I was speaking to someone yesterday whose friends have gotten a bunch of jobs in chip factories, has no idea that it's coming from the Biden administration legislation. I mean, people are not being able to connect things that are really helpful in their lives to things that have happened and have been done by the government. So really telling those stories and remembering to really speak to really genuinely be helpful to people, I think is the best way, and make that story known.
At the Atlantic, I would say, Jeff Goldberg is the editor-in-chief, and he works really hard to stay true to the founding motto of the Atlantic in 1857, which was, of neither party nor clique. And, whether it's having, writers on staff who come from both sides of the spectrum, on the right, everyone thinks of the Atlantic, thanks to the previous administration, and just stereotyping as a liberal publication, but it's really not. I mean, we have writers like David Fromm or Pete Wehner, heterodoxical thinkers like Ann Applebaum on staff. And, he's going to stay true to that work and hopefully building trust at the national level. On the local level, just to give two examples to something that David was saying, Mississippi Today, a nonprofit newsroom in Mississippi, did a marvelous job covering the Jackson, Mississippi water crisis, and proved to be a genuine resource for the citizens of that state when they weren't sure whether they were going to be able to drink clean water. Similarly, in Vermont, there's a publication up there, Vermont Digger. When the flooding happened there earlier this year, they were amazing on the ground covering the floods in Montpelier and elsewhere. And these publications are proving to be genuine resources for the communities in those states. And I think only through those types of services and that type of journalism do you establish trust at the local level.
Sadly, people trust entertainment and entertainers without much question. So it's a little bit different, but I think part of your
Just in part,
yeah,
how we got our president,
that's exactly correct. You give someone a platform and people go, I guess you're right. I guess I'm supposed to listen to you. I think part of your question was about the information people get now through social media and if that's contributing to that. And I think absolutely. And one of the unique opportunities I think Story has is to go beyond someone's title, role, or agency and talk about the human aspects of what they face within their job. Show that they also have a family. Show that they have all these other things that they're considering that contribute to the decisions that they're making that ultimately affect you. There's a human element that's missing from a lot of that information because it's rooted in statistics and systems and groups, but not individual people. And I think that's one of the bigger issues is we think of people as just the thing they do often in this sector, as opposed to who they are as a person and really digging into that.
I think that's so true in covering national and local politics. There are individuals who get annoyed, quite frankly, with all of what they would consider the personal stories we ask about them, opposed to just policies, positions they may take. But the reality is voters want to know, are you a parent? Have you struggled with mental illness? Do you live in a community that has been challenged with environmental issues? And we have an opportunity to tell those stories. So I asked that you excuse my alarm. They went off because I wanted to remember to open it up to you all for questions, or I would take up all the question time. If you don't have any, I certainly have more questions because I always have more questions. But I believe if you need a microphone, that we've got some runners for us. And if you can tell us your name and who you're here with, that would be awesome.
Hold it. Is that okay? Hi, I'm Corinne Whedon. I'm with the Frameworks Institute here in DC, and we conduct research on how people think about social issues and how to talk about them to build understanding. And something that David said about creating room and space for possibility of what can change is super important. And we have found an increase, which will surprise nobody, in this mindset that the system is rigged. But because the system is so ill-defined, like the economy is rigged, democracy is rigged, the government is rigged, politics is rigged, that type of messaging and framing can trigger different ways of thinking, right? It can trigger like, oh, the economy is rigged because capitalism advantages some people and not others, or the government doesn't look out for me at all, so the government's bad. So as communicators broadly, how do you think we can navigate like the reality that some systems are rigged to benefit some and not others, while also not advancing these fatalistic ideas that nothing can be done about it?
I'll certainly let them answer this great question, but your question reminds me of how when you cover national politics and you go out into cities, you very often meet people who say both parties the same, everything's going to happen regardless of who wins. I'm not going to vote because my voice doesn't have any impact. How can media combat that?
Well, I think one opportunity is just so the field of solutions journalism, or the solutions journalism, is growing, and it's much more accepted in journalism now because of news avoidance and the fact that people are just overwhelmed by negativity. So the driving question for a good story like that is who's doing better, or is anyone doing better? So if you look at a system, there's always variation in how this system is running. There's not one system. Usually there's different variations at the city level or at the county level. You can always look at examples of what we call positive deviance, a place that's doing something better, that's doing something smarter, to show that here's a system, or here's an approach to managing a problem that is outperforming others. There are better ways of doing this. It may not be happening in your town, but you can move people away from binaries, rigged or not rigged, and show them that there's more complexity in the system. It's also a way to sharpen accountability. When you show that something can be done better, it puts pressure on people to improve their game, but it doesn't create fatalism, because you're showing that there are these examples, these bright spots, these oases of excellence in every system. There always are. And by focusing on those and not just the negative deviance, not just the places where the system really is underperforming or is rigged, you can help people see that, you can help bring sort of oxygen into that whole conversation.
Just want to give a shout out to Frameworks. So in my domino example, that's a perfect example of, we actually now work with Frameworks for frame checks for our work. So as we're creatively, yes, Nat is wonderful and I love everything you guys do, but it's a perfect example of, we can take all the creative liberties we want, but the responsibility is in, what is the unintentional harm this can do? What does this character mean? What might we trigger with certain mindsets and so on? So it's a great example, at least for us, of how we're reaching out and trying to ensure that those are the inputs we have, that we're considering and centering as we take creative liberties to, entertain folks on a streaming platform.
The one thing I would just add to that is that, at least in my experience, it's been useful if the box is too big to build a smaller box. That is, when you have an enormous frame, when you have something that is as vast as the universe and you can't simply get your mind around it, to make your framework smaller, and then to fill that tight box with a solution, or to focus on the one thing that works, and then in so doing, at least give people an honest reflection of possibility.
Any more questions?
Thank you. My name is Grace Chimezie, and I work for the International Research and Exchange Board. And we currently work to build frameworks in supporting communities in trust building. And there was something you shared, David, about identifying elements of trust building and integrating that in the way you write your report so that communities can understand ways of building trust. And I know you didn't mention that, but I want to know what are some of the elements you've identified, and if you could share a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, basically the ones that I mentioned, and if people here have others that they want to add to that, I am really all ears, because it's something that we've been thinking a lot about. You know, how do you add value in the world? How do you, create journalism that will break through and persuade people? And so those 3 bits are the ones that I've settled on for talking to our team, walking in someone else's shoes and making that as manifest as we possibly can, finding as many ways as we can to show the reporting. And that extends to different forms too. That extends to trying to find ways in the context of both the paper page and in the section to bring the world onto the page. So for instance, we have a wonderful young columnist by the name of Christine Emba. And she started this year, this is one of many things she does, but going to Vexed or going into situations where people don't necessarily understand what's going on and asking the people who are there to write down on Post-it notes why they're there or what they're thinking about it. So for instance, she went to the March for Life and spent a day getting people to write on Post-it notes why they were there or what they saw as the future of the movement that they were involved in. And then finding a way to bring that on the page. And in doing that, one, you find out what people are thinking, but you also send a signal too, that like we care what other people are thinking. We aren't making stuff up. We're taking the real world and actually putting it there. And that's, that is reporting, and it's just reporting in a more visual and direct way. And then the last bit, which inevitably is the hardest bit, because prescriptions journey, that's where we get to making the box smaller and smaller. You're writing about things that if there was an answer, you wouldn't be writing about them. So you tried, sometimes I find that we back ourselves into a corner by trying to focus too much on the prescription when a prescription just isn't available. And so trying to find a way around that. And I don't have an excellent answer, but those are the 3 elements. But again, if people have other ideas, I really am in the constant search for looking for ways to build an authentic relationship with and trust with the reader, just as people in government are trying to do the same with the rest of the country.
Can I just add something to that? Just to add to that, one of the things that we found is kind of humility is a really important part of building trust. Like, a story that says, here's a response to a problem. Here's the evidence of its effectiveness. Here's its limitations. Here's what we could learn for it. There's lots of other people responding to this problem. We're not saying this is the best or the worst, but there's something to be learned from this. And then just kind of couching it in that humility, like not overclaiming. People feel that that's reasonable when you do that. And that's kind of the level of signal that seems to work.
Hi, I'm Eliza from Friedman Consulting. I'm curious, the democracy philanthropy field has grown massively over the past 6 or so years. A lot of that has been funding media, funding journalism, especially local journalism. I know a big philanthropic collaborative around local journalism was announced a few weeks ago, Press Forward. But a lot of this is still, the field is still maturing and people are still understanding that relationship. There are plenty of major funders of local journalism that don't necessarily see themselves as funders of democracy work. How, Peter, especially, how do we better build that connection and build that field, especially as it pertains with public trust and the relationship of the public with government, federal, local, state, et cetera?
It's a great question, and props to the Washington Post editorial page for writing about local journalism and the Press Forward announcement the other day. It's good editorial.
Persuasive. I hope.
Yes, very. So democracy funders have been increasingly coming into the local journalism space, which is a great thing. MacArthur, which actually spearheaded this Press Forward announcement, which is committing collectively $500 million to local news across the United States. They came at the issue originally from a democracy perspective, that this has to be a pillar of the democratic process, that people are getting this fair, accurate information and being engaged in their communities and getting the information that they need to be informed citizens. That said, our position is there just isn't enough philanthropy to support local journalism around the United States. And what you're ultimately going to have to do is convince individuals in cities and states and local communities to fund journalism philanthropically the way they used to subscribe to their local newspaper. At the local level, these citizens are going to have to contribute to their local nonprofit newsrooms, or else there's just not going to be enough money to go around. So we've seen like community foundations starting to get involved, and you're seeing like new newsrooms come on the scene in places like Tulsa and Indianapolis and Ohio. And it's great to see, but you know, this has also become a cliche and you've probably heard it, but the same way that local communities support, you know, hospitals and museums and libraries and the ballet, like individuals on the ground are going to have to support local journalism, or else we don't think there's enough money to fill the hole.
Thank you. My name is Dave Salamini. I work for the Democracy Communications Fund, one of the funders she's talking about. I think my question is largely for Candace. Thinking about mass and popular media, it intuitively reaches many, many, many people, right? So, okay, huge potential impact. I'm curious how you're thinking, or what thinking exists on measurement of that impact. I'm sure that the West Wing got a whole bunch of people interested in government, and that House of Cards turned a whole bunch of people off, right? But that, by the way, what happened to the decade between those two shows?
That's a great question.
There is a real challenge in figuring out, is an investment in that kind of shaping the culture over time. That's a very long-term theory of change. That's a massive amount of money. How should funders think about measuring that impact?
That is a great question that honestly, every single meeting I'm in, that is the question. What is it that we're measuring? What does impact even mean at this point? How many times do we hear impact, and it's impact, 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 and what that means? I think for us, what we realized as an organization was naturally for us early on, success, if you will, was how many nominations did we get? How many people this, how many people that? And we realized that ultimately all those projects that we hoped and thought were doing a certain thing, ultimately we're never reaching the actual impact in the real world that was desired. So this notion of impact for us specifically really has to do with our partnerships and the work they're doing actively. So for example, in the work we're doing with the partnership and with Will, who's over there, that's wonderful, that is about stories of civic leadership in a well-rounded way. The impact is based off of the influence that we'll have on the younger generation that we're hoping to encourage to participate in those sorts of roles. So the audience becomes very specific. Very often when we're talking about mass media, we're looking at it's the #1 show on Netflix. Those things are great, but ultimately mean very little. Whereas where our intention is very specific in that example, the only way we can measure it is through our partnerships and saying, did this help you reach the bottom line that we talked about in the real world? What are we doing unintentionally that's preventing you? Because we've learned a lot of that as well. So many projects that intend to push certain agendas forward have in fact done the exact opposite. So it's really in the partnerships and taking it away from this idea of commercial success from a mass viewership or awards perspective.
Yes, Dr. Gary Roundtree, Senior, National Active Retired Fellow Employees. I want to have a question. How is the journalist of today being involved with AI and the paradigm shift of journalists that's covered back from the Kennedy era up into the current era and reaching the larger or the bigger audience today changed the way journalists are covering government today?
Yeah, I think the question is still out in terms of the impact of AI on what it is that we do. And there's, a lot of concern and anxiety. But I've been recently hearing arguments that there's a lot of opportunity too that we've yet to discover. And I think many of us are still trying to figure that out. It would be really interesting to see what role you all believe AI is playing and how you're going to go ahead moving forward and covering government.
I can't speak to how we're covering government so much as just how we're going about our jobs, which will involve covering government. Number one is transparency. When and if AI is used, to be clear about it. Has AI helped you write or edit this story? Has AI helped you with your research? If that's come to pass, to be clear about it. Did AI generate this image? That's the bit that really worries me, where I do think, at least for the Post, we probably aren't going to reproduce AI images, or if we do, they'll be so heavily watermarked that it will be evident to any reader that it was not something that came from the physical world, but from the technological one. At the same time, the possibilities for making us more efficient and improving our work, but also the reader experience. I can see lots of ways for AI prompts to show up in the course of a piece that will actually engage and connect a reader to the question at hand. And that if you're taking the example of government and policy, if you have a story on subject X and then an AI prompt comes either at the end of the story or in the middle of the story to prompt you to think more deeply about the question at hand, to interrogate you a little bit more about how you feel about this political story or this policy story, then maybe that's to the greater good. So it's here. There are early studies that show that humans who are working with AI as a partner are actually more productive or can be more productive. We're gonna take it as it goes, but starting first with being transparent about it, acknowledging that it's here and that it can be used both to improve the production of the journalism, but probably the journalistic experience too, at least for us.
Awesome. We may have time for one more question. We're a little over, but wanted to give everyone an opportunity. One more.
Hey, thank you all for the discussion today. My name is Richard Coffin. I'm from USA Facts. We're a small organization that tries to make government data easily accessible for people to use. And I'm just curious if you all can elaborate a little bit more on something you briefly touched on, which is the role of data and data journalism in building transparent, trustworthy journalism. If there is any, I'd be really curious to hear more about that.
Yeah, in our work, we really begin usually with data. I mean, and this actually connects to the AI question. The ability to be able to look at it, especially administrative data, and ask questions that are meaningful to people, like of the 3,000 odd counties in the United States, which ones are seeing improvements in sort of the admission rate in hospitals for certain kinds of mental health issues or other issues like that, which places are seeing reductions in a whole range of problems related to, say, climate change, perhaps, in terms of agriculture or water issues and things like that. The ability to look through these very, very large data sets now and ask sophisticated questions that then help you to identify stories or places where you can report on, where there's knowledge to be to be gained. I mean, you can also look at the data sources and look at the worst places and say, like, here's people who are, you know, really doing a bad job protecting the public or really underperforming compared to the average, where you can really shout out, you know, not shout out, but call out the behavior. But I think in terms of the ability to look at the performance variation under the curve through data and AI, I think is going to really potentially support the kind of value that journalists can offer.
USA Facts is terrific and a force for good in the trust department. So congratulations on that work.
Awesome. Well, it was a privilege having this conversation with you all, having you all here. I hope everyone heard something that interested them or made them think. And I think our panelists can probably be reached on social media afterwards. So if you want to stay in touch and ask them more questions. Thank you so much for joining us.